And Jericho has a new book out called The New Testament. It's actually a wonderful cover. And his first book, Please, which is also has a wonderful cover on it. Jericho worked as a speechwriter for the mayor of New Orleans before he received his PhD in creative writing and literature from the University of Houston. Were you in there with my student, Matthew Siegel?
Yeah!
Oh, he's my darling student. That's my baby, yeah.
Oh my goodness, he's my friend. I like text him all the time.
Text him. Tell him you're with me. I just was with him in San Francisco. Anyway, I'm sorry I interrupted. It suddenly dawned on me. I think that's going to be on television. You can cut that out, can't you? All right, before receiving his PhD in creative writing and literature from the University of Houston, he holds an MFA from the University of New Orleans, is an assistant professor at Emory University, and the recipient of the Whiting Writers Award and fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard University, the Breadloaf Writers Conference, and the Krakow Poetry Seminar in Poland. His poems have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, and his first book, Please, New Issues, won the 2009 American Book Award. I think that this new book is going to garner some great prizes as well. It's a wonderful book, and I think his poetry is really alive and is in a storytelling tradition, but with a twist. And Jericho and I are great gossipers, so I think that I see a little bit of that in his work. Let's welcome the inimitable Jericho Brown.
Okay.
You okay? Yeah, just hold it.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Maria. It's always a pleasure to be here and to spend time with Maria, who has built this center from the ground up. She's such a hard worker, but of course she doesn't do it without help. I want to say a big thanks to Susan and to Smita for all of their hard work in making days like today, and Jane for making days like today happen. This is really wonderful. Yeah, let's give it a hand. Yeah. I'm going to read just a few poems for you guys. I'll read poems mostly from my new book. The title is The New Testament. This is my baby, and my mother's still mad at me about that title. She calls me on the phone and she says, "You can't change it." I'm like, "It's already out, Ma." But I got a couple of requests, so I'll also read maybe two poems from the first book, Please. But I just wanted to say, the first time I read here, I read with the poet Gerald Stern, and it's the kind of thing that poetry offers us, the opportunity to meet our idols. And that's part of what poetry does. It calls out to community. It makes community happen. It makes us much more aware of ourselves as brothers and sisters to one another. At least that's what's done by the poems that I love so much. So I'm going to start a poem that comes from the community in which I was raised. My parents are fundamentalist evangelical Christians. When I was growing up, we went to church every Sunday and every Wednesday night, and if there was a special program in between, we went to church on those nights too. And so I'm going to read this poem that sort of, in some ways, commemorates that, because everything we did, just leaving the house, going to school, before we ate, before we did anything, my father always insisted that we said a prayer. And so I'm going to begin here today with a prayer. Prayer of the backhanded. Not the palm, not the pear tree switch, not the broomstick, nor his closest extension cord. not his braided belt, but God. Bless the back of my daddy's hand, which, holding nothing tightly against me and not wrapped in leather, eliminated the air between itself and my cheek. Make full this dimpled cheek, unworthy of its unfisted print, and forgive my forgetting the love of a hand hungry for reflex, a hand that took no thought of its target, like hail from a blind sky, involuntary, fast, but brutal in its bruising. Father, I bear the bridge of what might have been a broken nose. I lift to you what was a busted lip. Bless the boy who believes his best beatings lack intention, the mark of the beast. Bring back to life the son who glories in the sin of immediacy, calling it love. God, save the man whose arm, like an angel's invisible wing, may fly backward in fury, whether or not his son stands near. Help me hold in place my blazing jaw as I think to say, excuse me. Labor. I spent what light Saturday sent sweating, and learned to cuss, cutting grass for women, kind enough to say they couldn't tell the damned difference between their mowed lawns and their vacuumed carpets just before handing over a $5 bill rolled tighter than a joint and asking me in to change a few light bulbs. I called those women old because they wouldn't move out of a chair without my help or walk without a hand at the base of their backs. I called them old, and they must have been. They're all dead now, dead and in the earth I once tended. The loneliest people have the earth to love, and not one friend their own age. Only mothers to baby them, and big sisters to boss them around. Women they want to please and pray for the chance to say please to. I don't do that kind of work anymore. My job is to look at the childhood I hated and say, I once had something to do with my hands. For this next poem, you may need to know that the radio staple Memory Lane was released posthumously by Capitol Records from the 1979 album Minnie. It's one of my favorite songs. Well, it probably is. It is my favorite song by the singer Minnie Riperton. Many of you won't know who Minnie Riperton is, but she's one of the greatest influences of all the singers who could hit people like Mariah Carey, who hit those really high notes that you either love or they make you want to turn the stereo down. The song that some of you might know by Minnie Riperton is a song called Loving You. The chorus goes something like la 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 dooby dooby doo doo. Okay, never mind. I know. So, and this is not about that song. Okay. Track 3, Back Down, Memory Lane. Dangerous men park carefully, slanting oversized automobiles into the ditches that line 77th. It's Friday night in Shreveport. Checks have been cashed, bills folded and stashed into wallets and bra straps. Card tables, folding chairs, and every gold tooth in town crowd our grandmother's camelback shotgun house because gambling's illegal in Shreveport, and she cuts only $2 a hand for every joker that slides into a queen. We don't know Minnie Ripperton's dead, years now, buried with one breast to her name. School uniformed in a corner, we learn to listen to music over hollers, through smoke. Her soprano comes across a photograph and giggles, but ends up crying. Save me. We think we'd like that kind of love, sad and steeped in trumpets, though a block up the entire decade shoots for words to put in the dictionary. Crackhead, drive-by, loss and gain. A bullet meant for the man named Money removes his baby sister's chin. Ask for horns in Shreveport and sirens are on the way. We can't hear either. Grandmama calling for us to change the tape. No more slow songs. Keep us awake. These years before surgeons slice her in vain and we drive away, our car stereos playing rhythm and blues. So, it's so lovely that y'all clap after every poem. You make me feel like I'm the real thing. This next poem, I'm reading poems that are sort of about where I'm from and sort of how I came to be. And this next poem goes a little bit further in explaining some of that in its title, because it's titled after a word that isn't in any dictionary, and yet I heard it all the time when I was growing up. I was writing, when I moved to San Diego, I lived in San Diego for a little while before moving back to the South in Georgia where I live now, but when I moved there to San Diego, I started missing the language of the South that I would hear so much. And so there's this word that means a person and everyone you might associate with that person. And the word is Anem. Now, I'm going to use it in a sentence. So for instance, if you see someone that you hadn't seen for a while and they greet you, they would approach you and they would say, "Hey, how you doing? How you been? How is your mama and them?" So that's how the word works. And that's the title of the poem. Anem. They said to say goodnight and not goodbye. Unplugged the TV when it rained. They hid money in mattresses, so to sleep on decisions. Some of their children were not their children. Some of their parents had no birth dates. They could sweat a cold out of you. They'd wake without an alarm telling them to. Even the short ones reached certain shelves. Even the skinny cooked animals too quick to catch. And I don't care how ugly one of them arrived. That one got married to somebody fine. They fed families with change and wiped their kitchens clean. Then another century came. People like me forgot their names. I'm going to shift gears here and read just a few persona poems. As all of you know, a persona poem is simply a poem that is most definitely not in the voice of the poet. You could write a persona poem in the voice of a historical figure or even in the voice of an inanimate object. This first one is in the voice of the poet I always think of as my first poet. And I say that with the same affection that we might think of our first love or our first kiss. I remember being a kid and coming across these poems and falling in love with poetry. The poem mentions his favorite singer, the Empress of Blues, Bessie Smith. It also is important maybe to know that he was the leading figure of the Harlem Renaissance. And the poem also makes allusions to two different things. One is his testimony before the Senate Committee on Un-American Activities during the Red Scare and McCarthyism of the 1950s. And also his very famous poem, a poem titled The Negro Speaks of Rivers. And if you haven't read The Negro Speaks of Rivers, you should leave here and Google it as soon as you leave. It's really an amazing poem. Langston Hughes wrote The Negro Speaks of Rivers when he was only 18 years old. Isn't that something? Every time I think about that, every time I think about Langston Hughes writing a poem like that, when he was only 18 years old, every time I think about him writing The Negro Speaks of Rivers when he was only 18 years old, I really hate Langston Hughes. Langston's Blues. O blood of the river of songs, O songs of the river of blood, let me lie down. Let my words lie sound in the mouths of men repeating invocations pure and perfect as a moan that mounts in the mouth of Bessie Smith. Blues for the angels kicked out of heaven. Blues for the angels who miss them still. Blues for my people and what water they know. Oh, weary drinkers drinking from the bloody river. Why go to heaven with Harlem so close? Why sing of rivers with fathers of our own to miss? I remember mine and taste a stain like blood coursing the body of a man chased by a mob. I write his running, his sweat. Here he climbs a poplar for the sky, but it is only sky. The river, follow me. You'll see. We tried to fly and learned we couldn't swim. Dear singing river full of my blood, are we as loud under water? Is it blood that binds brothers, or is it the Mississippi running through the fattest vein of America? When I say home, I mean I wanted to write some lines. I wanted to hear the blues, but here I am, swimming the river again. What runs through the fat veins of a drowned body? What America can a body call home? When I say Congo, I mean blood. When I say Nile, I mean blood. When I say Euphrates, I mean, if only you knew what blood we have in common. So much in Louisiana, they call a man like me red. And red was too dark for my daddy, and my daddy was too dark for America. He ran like a man from my mother and me, and my mother's sobs are the songs of Bessie Smith, who wears more feathers than death. Oh, the death my people refuse to die. When I was 18, I wrote down the river, though I couldn't win a race, climbed a tree that winter, then fell flat on my wet, red face. Line after line I read all the time, but there was nothing I could do about race. Janis Joplin recorded the Gershwin Standard Summertime with Big Brother and the Holding Company for their 1968 chart-topping album, Cheap Thrills. She died of a heroin overdose in 1970, and she was 27 years old. Track 5, Summertime, as performed by Janis Joplin. God's got his eye on me, but I ain't a sparrow. I'm more like a lawnmower. No, a chainsaw. Anything that might mangle each manicured lawn in Port Arthur, a place I wouldn't return to if the mayor offered me every ounce of oil my daddy cans at the refinery. My voice, ain't sweet. Nothing nice about it. It won't fly, even with Jesus watching. I don't believe in Jesus. The Baxter boys climbed a tree just to throw persimmons at me. The good and perfect gifts from above hit like lightning, leave bruises. So I lied. I believe, but I don't think God likes me. The girls in the locker room slapped dirty pads across my face. They called me bitch, but I never bit back. I ain't a dog. Chainsaw, I say. My voice hacks at you. I bet I tear my throat. I try so hard to sound jagged. I get high and say one thing so many times, like Willie Baker, who worked across the street. I saw some kids whip him with a belt while he repeated, please. School out, summertime, and the living lashed. Mama said I should be thankful that the town's worse to coloreds than they are to me, that I'd grow out of my acne. God must love Willie Baker, all that leather and still a please that sounds like music. See? I wouldn't know a sparrow from a mockingbird. The band plays, I just belt out, please. This tune ain't half the blues. I should be thankful. I get high and moan like a lawnmower so nobody notices. I'm such an ugly girl. I'm such an ugly girl. I try to sing like a man boys call boy. I turn my face to God. I pray. I wish I could pour oil on everything green in Port Arthur. So I was thinking about, we were having conversations about poetry and about writing and about what we want our writing to do. And, I wasn't going to read this poem, but I wasn't going to read these last two poems, actually, but I sort of got rid of some other poems so I could read them, because in a lot of ways they're about writing and they're about what my intentions are when I write. So I want to, I'm going to dedicate these next couple of poems to Maria. Again, you are not as tired of the poem as I am, of the memory, a returning toothache on either side of the mouth, an ingrown hair beneath the chin, simple itch, bruising, scratch, and again I am bundled in Cousin Kenny's clothes from last school year, my hand held by my mother's. We walk as if the house behind us isn't warm enough for my feet. In the dark, we make a few blocks around the one-story neighborhood that I loved, though nothing I've written tells you this. I want to cut it out of me because turns out it never mattered. Right now, my mother's asleep on my father's chest. His arm has landed in the same place around her most of 30 years. Give a man a minute. She's asleep, and I'm typing it all over again. Everywhere, a man is shifting a bit to make his woman more comfortable in his arms. I should have told you this lines ago. We walked back to the house we ran from because my mother loves her husband and his hands, even if laid heavy against her. I know you don't want to believe that, but give a man a minute. We're not done. My father loves his wife and the shape of her body, even if hunched in retreat, their son keeping up. I'm so sick of it. Another awful father scarring this page too. A bruising scratch. We walked back through an open door. And why don't I mention how he kissed my forehead before covering me on the couch that was my bed? Listen, and you can hear them in the next room, planning names for the youngest of us, then making love loud enough for the oldest to learn. And one last poem I sort of see in that same vein. Let me say before I sit down, though, that it really is an honor to read with Penny. Thank you for pairing me with her. This is really wonderful. Heart condition. I don't want to hurt a man, but I like to hear one beg. 2 people touch twice a month in 10 hotels, and we call it long distance. He holds down one coast, I wonder the other, like any African American, Africa with its condition, and America with its condition, and black folk born in this nation content to carry half of each. I shoulder my share. My man flies to touch me. Sky on our side. Sky above his world I wish to write, which is where I go wrong. Words are a sense of sound. I get smart. My mother shakes her head. My grandmother sighs. He ain't got no sense. My grandmother is dead. She lives with me. I hear my mother shake her head over the phone. Somebody cut the cord. We have a long distance relationship. I lost half of her to a stroke. God gives to each a body. God gives every body its pains. When pain mounts in my body, I try thinking of my white forefathers who hurt their black bastards quite legally. I hate to say it, but one pain can ease another. Doctors rather I take pills. My man wants me to see a doctor. What are you when you leave your man wanting? What am I now that I think so fondly of airplanes? What's my name? Whose is it? While we make love, my lover leaves me with words I wish to write, flies from one side of a nation to the outside of our world. I don't want the world. I only want African sense of American sound. Him touching this body, aware of its pains. Greetings, earthlings. My name is slow and stumbling. I come from planet Trouble. I am here to love you, uncomfortable. Thank you. I think it's really important that people begin to understand that there is absolutely nothing wrong with having emotions, that it is indeed human to have emotions. And that sounds trite,
yeah.
But the truth is that we live in a world where over and over again we're told by our journalism, by what we watch on YouTube, by what is said on social media, by even our interactions with one another in passing, we're told to be numb. You know, we're asked to be numb to what goes on this planet, in this country. We're asked over in our families, you know, to act as if things that are affecting us are not affecting us, right? And it's almost as if the person who shows any sort of passion is made fun of or treated badly. But poetry is different because it awakens those feelings, it awakens emotions, it makes us, it makes you aware of the fact that what you are feeling is indeed real and that there's nothing wrong with having those feelings.
Yeah, and one honest feeling in the closet whispered to yourself, and then leads to another honest feeling whispered to yourself, and then one day the closet door opens a little bit and somebody might look at in my case, I really was literally writing in a closet. And my son he went to Berkeley as an English major, and he came home, he says, what are all these scraps of paper, these napkins with words on them? And, you know, and I said, you know, well, you know, they're just things I write down. And he goes, Mom, you're a poet. And I said, oh, don't be silly, you know. I'd had a roommate in college who was a real poet, you know. And so that, anyway, that helped. All you need is like one person to say, oh, yeah, I kind of see that. And then that gives you the courage to go on to the next thing. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
But how I understand, the three of us somewhat understand, I'm beginning to know more and more, but language is powerful.
Language is very powerful, and I met a woman who had a background similar to mine, whose mother died when she was young and her dad was an alcoholic, and we met when we were in our early 30s, and we started to exchange poems by mail even though we lived in the same town. And it felt as if I get an envelope from her, and it felt as if like a bomb was going to go off in the mailbox. And I carried in, and it felt like it was like a stick of dynamite or something. And the same for her. And
Yeah.
it's very powerful.
Yeah. Language is very powerful. Words make things happen. Words really do. They change minds.
They do change minds.
Words cause violence. And words also can be the greatest expressions of love. Right?
Yeah.
They map our feelings, and they map us on to one another in so many ways. So it's so funny though, because they're words, you know, they're not actually, you can't touch them, but they are there. There's something in us. The brain lights up when we hear certain words. So, yeah.
Yeah, and one of my students said today, she asked me, well, can I use a specific name like Agnes, my Aunt Agnes, in a poem? Because people told me not to. And I said, oh, no, you must, because it's your Aunt Agnes and you have feelings, but everybody's had an Aunt so-and-so or an Aunt so-and-so. So words, Maria's always saying that words make the bridge between people. And the more, what's weird, his work is so honest and tender and specific, but what's weird is the more specific you are to yourself, the more universal you end up being.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of magical.
That's the magic of literature, right? That, I mean, and that's part of what all of literature does, poetry in particular, but all of literature takes history down to the scale of one.
That's right.
Right? All of history suddenly goes down to the scale of one, so that even when we're reading a novel or we're reading a poem or whatever we're reading, we see this experience, and suddenly we begin to understand how the personal is indeed political, or how the private experience stands for the universal experience.
That's right. And if everybody read Red Badge of Courage every year and War and Peace every year, and maybe if we showed the dead bodies coming home from Iraq, Afghanistan, if we could make it personal and specific, maybe we wouldn't have these wars anymore.
In closing, team, because this is a team. We're a team.
Yeah, absolutely.
For that individual or groups of people who are holding all this stuff in, what tools or what could you say to them that they can begin, and maybe not so much to be a poet or to do gigs, but just to kind of get themselves on track? Is there anything that you can say that could just kind of nudge them to say, okay, you know, it's all right to write this. Maybe it's best to write it out versus to go out and get angry and do something crazy in society and then have to pay for it. Is there anything that you guys can say to them folks?
Well, first of all, I think we all start off as poets and we kill poetry in the schools. We were talking about that earlier.
Wow.
So I like to work with kids and just have them write about, say, the weather, and just start with a word or two about their own experience, and that's going to lead to more words. One word leads to another. And I also encourage people to write journals and to say the word I, because the word I ends up being personal and political.
I think that reading, you know, I grew up at a time when there was, you know, now you go in a bookstore and you have to walk to the back of the bookstore to get to the books. First you pass all kinds of clothing. They sell food, they sell coffee, they sell trinkets, they sell sweaters, and then there might be some book, like, and this is like every college bookstore that you ever go to. The books are sort of somewhere off in the ghetto. And then, even in libraries now, you know, you pass by a floor of computers, or rows and rows of computers before you can actually get books. But I grew up in a time where, you know, when you went to the library and there was nothing there but books. You went to the bookstore and, oh my God, books. And I think it's true though that books do something for us that, though I love Scandal on Thursday night, though I love, I love it. Though I love, you know, the occasional reality TV show or the occasional talk show, though I love movies and film, right? And I think of film as another art form of high art. But reading does something for us that no other art can do. Reading asks us to create in our head those people, those characters, right? And so that they're not only the poets, not only the writers, but they also become ours, right? I remember the first time I read, there's a novel by Alice Walker called The Third Life of Grange Copeland. And I remember it became very evident, I don't know why, but it became very evident to me that the people, I read it in this class that I was taking as an undergrad, and I realized that the people I had been envisioning in my head were people from my family. And I looked around, like for each character I had to sort of assign them a face. And I looked around the room where I was learning this text, and I realized, oh my God, when I see a character from this book, I don't see the same person that these other people
That's right.
see. And we were all becoming acquainted with the same characters.
That's right.
But reading asks you to be interactive. You don't just lay back and get entertained, right? Like, it asks you to become a part of this work that's being done during the writing of the text. And so I think the best thing anybody can do is to search out the books that will make a difference to their lives, that will change them. There is a book for every life on this planet.
That's right.
There is a book for every life on this planet. And I think that it is important that we keep looking for that book or those books that make a difference to our lives. And let me say this last thing, just in case, anybody, because people are afraid of that. People are really afraid of reading. And it is, they're just
that's a really
scared.
good point.
They're scared. And that's part of
I
the
have
reason.
some in-laws who are very scared of some books.
Part of the reason they're afraid. Well, part of the reason they're afraid for a few reasons. One is, like I said earlier, everything about the world tells us to be numb.
That's right.
And they understand, sort of intuitively, inherently, they know, oh my God, I have to read, and then I'm going to have to experience things that I have not in any way been prepared to experience. I don't want my emotions. So that's number one. Then number two, they understand intuitively that, and inherently, they understand reading is interactive. Nobody wants to interact. We all just want to lay around. we all want to be told what to do, right?
Wow. And reading gives permission.
Yeah.
Because, I have, my oldest son is gay, and so my daughter-in-law and my straight son are very afraid, oh my God, what if our son is gay? And so there are certain books that I wanted them to read, my grandson to read. He's very smart. Oh no, because that might give them permission. Even though I wasn't even thinking about that. I was thinking about something else entirely. But there was like one gay character that walks in a room for 3 seconds. God forbid.
So am I hearing this that there are people walking amongst us
that are terrified of books.
Of reading.
Well, but they've
there
also
always have been. But of the Salem witch trials.
But isn't
but
this is 2014.
I think a lot of people are intimidated by books because, as you said, a lot of things happen to us in school where like reading is beaten out of us in one way or another by words or by literal, sometimes by ruler across the knuckles, right? For some of us, right? Like, I think that a lot of people are intimidated by reading. But if we think about art, if we think about literature the same way we think about any other piece of art, for instance, when we're in the car, if we turn on the radio, song after song comes on, and we don't hear them, or we're thinking, oh, whatever. But then there's one song, maybe out of 7.
That's a green light for something.
Yeah, a song will come on and we're like, oh yeah, that's my jam. Right. And we turn the stereo up.
That's right.
And we do a little jig in our car. And reading is the same way. A book of poetry is the same way. It's up to us in the same way that when we're in our car and we allow ourselves to fall prey to the music and the vitality of the song, right? It's up to us to put ourselves in the position where we can fall prey to the music and the vitality of poetry.
That's right.